Okay, I suppose everybody's here, so we'll start. So good morning. So last week, here's a summary of what we were doing. So we want to show now that that beta C, the critical inverse temperature, is finite in dimension 2 and higher. So I explained last week why it's enough to check that if you look at the probability with plus boundary condition, the box Bn, that the spin in the middle of the box takes the value -1. If we are able to show that this is bounded above by a function of beta that goes to 0 as beta goes to infinity, and that is uniform in the size of the box Bn, then from this it immediately follows that beta C is finite. And then what we proved when we wanted to derive such a bound, what we did is we introduced the contours of a configuration, and we were able to bound the probability of this event in terms of the contours. Namely, so we were only working dimension 2. I promised an argument to show that this implies the result in higher dimension also. I will do it later today. But so what we proved is that the probability that the spin at the origin takes the value -1 was bounded by a sum over all possible contours surrounding the origin of the probability that this particular contour gamma star belongs to the contour of the configuration. So that's where we were last week. And now I need an upper bound on this probability. So I think I already stated it last week, but let me state it again. So it's lemma 337. So the following, so for any beta, for any contour gamma star, we have that the probability that gamma star belongs to the contour of the configuration is bounded above by E minus 2 beta times the length of gamma star. So let's prove that. So let's first write down explicitly this probability in terms of this low temperature representation that we saw last week. So we have that the probability, as usual, I omit beta in 0, beta is fixed. So probability that gamma contains gamma star, that's, okay, I can probably do it here. That's the sum of the whole configuration in the box Bn, compatible with the plus boundary condition, such that, let's say, gamma of omega contains gamma star. Okay. And then we have the probability of the configuration. So let me do it slowly. So it's mu plus Bn of omega. And then this we expressed last week in terms of the contours of the configuration. So this leads to the following identity. So this is the sum of the whole omega, such that gamma of omega contains gamma star. And then we had the probability. Let me think how I want to write it. So probability. So let me do it like that. So it's the product of a whole gamma of omega minus gamma star, E minus 2 beta gamma. Then I want to take out a contribution which is always here, which is this E minus 2 beta gamma star. So if I put it here, I just have the product of E minus 2 beta times the length of gamma for all the gamma in the configuration, which is what we had last week. But I'm taking it out because it's always there, because all my configuration contains gamma star. So I want to get it here. And that's exactly the term I want to keep in the end, so it's convenient to put it out. And then I still have to put the partition function. So I have the sum over all, say, omega tilde in omega Bn plus, product over all contours of the configuration omega tilde, E minus 2 beta gamma. So that's just an identity. It's this low temperature representation we had last week. Okay. Now, let me write it slightly differently. So what I want to do, so this is equal to this E minus 2 beta gamma star that we had. Then what we have is a ratio of two very similar looking quantities. So in the numerator I have this, again with the constraint that gamma of omega contains gamma star. Okay. Now, the claim would be proved if I was able to show that this ratio is smaller than 1. Right? So I would like to be able to see the sum in the numerator as being the same sum as I have in the denominator, but with an additional constraint. If I was able to do that, then obviously the numerator would be smaller than the denominator. Then the ratio would be smaller than 1, and I would be done. Okay? So I have to work a little bit with the expression in the numerator to write it in a way that looks closer to what we have in the denominator so that I can compare them easily. Okay. And what I will do is the following. So take an arbitrary configuration that contributes to the numerator. So let omega in omega bn plus be such that it contains gamma star as one of its contours. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to erase gamma star from the contours of the configuration. So what I want to do is really the following. So I have 0 somewhere. Then we have the contour gamma star. Something like that. That's gamma star. And then we have other contours in the configuration. This guy will be some other things there. Okay. Still plus boundary condition outside. And now I would like to map this to a configuration where the contour gamma star has been erased, so it's not there anymore. I just draw it so that we can compare the two pictures. So it's supposed to be the same as, okay, it's not very good, but it's supposed to be the same as you have here. And then you have the other contours that have not moved. So it's supposed to be exactly the same thing. And this guy, and then we have this, something like that. Okay? So I would like to just erase it. So to do that, I have to act on this configuration in such a way that I can show that this indeed gives me a configuration omega bn plus, which is kind of obvious, but let's be explicit. So in this configuration, if I put again the values of the spins, so in this region I have plus spins, because I have not met any contours. Here I've crossed the contours, I have minus spins, minus, it would be plus, it would be minus. Here I would get minuses everywhere. Here I have pluses, okay, minuses. And if I compare with what happens if I remove the contour, then here I should still get pluses outside. Then I still get minus, plus, minus, plus, minus, plus. But then if the contour has been removed, I still have pluses now here, and I have minuses here. So you see that the only effect of removing the contour is I have flipped all the spins which are inside the contour. So all the minuses become pluses, all the pluses become minuses. But in particular, all the contours which were inside gamma star are still present in my configuration. I've really only removed gamma star. So let me write this down explicitly. So I have this configuration omega, then I introduce a new configuration E gamma star of omega, so it's a configuration omega bn plus by the following. So I want this configuration E gamma star of omega at vertex I to be given by omega I if I is not in the interior of gamma star. I'm not doing anything outside gamma star. exactly as we see here. Nothing happens outside. And I change the sign of omega I if I is inside the interior of gamma star. Okay, so I have a transformation of my configuration which exactly amounts to erasing the contour gamma star. So this, by this construction, I get that the contours of E gamma star of omega are exactly the contours of omega minus gamma star. Okay? So that's what we want to do. And if I do that, then I can now very easily rewrite the numerator here in a different way. So let me introduce the subset of omega plus. So how should I write it down? Let's see. C gamma star. So it's a subset of omega Bn plus, which is defined as the following. So I will have C gamma star is the set of all configuration omega in Bn plus, in omega Bn plus, sorry, omega Bn plus, such that there exists omega tilde in omega Bn plus, such that omega is E gamma star of omega tilde. So it's the set of all configuration that can be obtained from another configuration by erasing the contour gamma star from the other configuration. Okay. So it's the image of this function. Okay. So if I do that now, I can rewrite very easily this ratio. So we get that, let's say, the numerator, sum over all omega in omega Bn plus containing gamma star product over all gamma in gamma of omega except gamma star E minus 2 beta gamma. This I can just rewrite as the sum over all configuration omega which are in this set C gamma star, and then the product over all gamma in gamma of omega. I don't have to remove gamma star, it has already been removed now. E minus 2 beta gamma. So now this is a subset of omega lambda plus, so this is certainly smaller than the sum over all omega in omega Bn plus product over all gamma in gamma of omega E minus 2 beta gamma. Okay? But that means that this is exactly the denominator here. So this means that the numerator is smaller than the denominator, so this whole thing here is smaller than 1, as we wish. So all this is smaller than 1. Okay? So this indeed proves that the probability that we started with is smaller than E minus 2 beta gamma star. So this concludes the proof of this lemma. Okay? So here what played an absolutely crucial role in the argument is the plus-minus symmetry that we have when the magnetic field is not there. So when H is equal to 0. That's what allowed us to just flip the spin inside the configuration to remove a contour. That's something that is not true in more complicated models. So you cannot implement the Pearl's argument in such an easy way. You can still generalize it to cover such cases, but it becomes much more difficult. Okay. So now we are in a good situation to prove. So we have this estimate. So combining this with what we did last week, we arrive at the following, maybe I keep the statement of the lemma, we arrive at the following upper bound on the probability of seeing a minus spin in the middle of the box. So with this lemma, we conclude that the probability that sigma 0 is equal to -1. This is smaller than the sum over all contour gamma star surrounding 0 of E minus 2 beta gamma star. Right, so there is no probability anymore. Now it's just a purely combinatorial quantity, which I have here, a sum over passes with some weight associated to the passes. So the only thing I have to do now is to show that this is indeed vanishing as beta goes to infinity. So that's not very difficult. What we are going to do is we are going to sum over gamma star according to their lengths. So this I can write as a sum over the length of gamma star. So the length of the smallest contour which can surround the origin. So if I have a minus here, the smallest contour is of length 4. Okay. So L has to be larger or equal to 4. And then I will sum over all gamma star surrounding the origin. E minus 2 beta times the length of gamma star. So we will force the length of gamma star to be equal to L. So it will be just E minus 2 beta L. Right? So this is nothing but the sum over L larger or equal to 4, E minus 2 beta L, times the number of contour gamma star surrounding the origin and of length L. Okay. So the only thing I still have to do is to get an upper bound on the size of this set. Okay. So that's not very difficult. So let's see. I will do it in 2 steps. The first step is to observe that the number of passes of length L starting at a given vertex V is bounded above, or is small, I will directly, is smaller than. So what do we do? So the first step I'm starting at some vertex V, then I have to start my path. So I have 4 ways of starting my path. I can go in these 4 directions. I'm on Z2, right? So I get 4 for the first choice, and then the next choice, at most I will have, let's say I've taken this edge, then the next step, at most I have 3 possibilities because I cannot use the same edge twice. So maybe I will take this one, and once I've taken this one again, I have at most 3 possibilities, so I will get 3 to the power L minus 1. It's a rough upper bound, of course, you have much less passes than that, but that will be enough for what we want to do. So that's the number of passes of length L that start at a given vertex. Problem is that our gamma star is not starting at a given vertex. The only constraint we have is that it surrounds the origin. Right? So we don't know any vertex through which we are sure that it's going. Right? So we have to do some small additional argument. Where do I put this stuff? There. So the only thing that remains to do is the following simple observation. So we have 0 somewhere, and then we can look at the set of all dual vertices here. I call these vertices, and I take here something of length L. Actually, L over 2 is even enough. L over 2. And then I claim that the contour gamma star has to visit one of these vertices. Why? Well, suppose it's not the case, so I have my contour gamma star. It has to surround 0, so it has to do something like that, but it's not crossing this segment of length L over 2. But that means that the total number of horizontal pieces that I have above this horizontal line is at least equal to L over 2. The same for the bottom segment. I have at least L over 2 of them. That already makes L of them. Plus I have to join them vertically. So that means that the length of gamma star is strictly larger than L. Okay? It's not possible. I'm looking at the gamma star equal to L. So if it has to be equal to, if it has to have a length of L and surround the origin, it has to, at some point, visit one of these vertices. Okay? So that's good, because I don't know through which vertex it's going, but I know that it's going through one of these L over 2 vertices. So now I can very easily bound this quantity. Actually, I will do it directly here. This one. So this will be smaller than the choice of the initial vertex. So I have L over 2 choices for the starting vertex. And then once I've chosen a starting vertex, say this one, then I have just the path of length at most L. And we have seen that this is bounded by 4 times 3 to the power L minus 1. So as I said, it's a very rough bound. One can do much better if you really want to work harder, but this will be good enough. So using this bound, we get the following. We conclude that mu plus Bn sigma 0 equal minus 1. This is bounded by the sum. Okay, let me just let a bit of room. The sum over all L larger or equal to 4. Then I have this, there is a 2. I can take out a 3, so it will be something like 2/3. Sum over all L of L times 3 e minus 2 beta to the power L. Okay, just to use this bound. Okay, we get this. Now this, I will call this quantity, I will call delta beta. That's the quantity I'm interested in. Okay. This sum, this series. Now observe that this series is, this quantity delta of beta is finite whenever beta is large enough. Actually, whenever beta is larger than log of 3 over 2, the series will be convergent. So delta of beta is finite for all beta larger than log 3 over 2. Well, obviously, right? And actually, it's also immediate to check that the limit as beta goes to plus infinity of delta of beta is in fact going to 0. So it's exactly the function we wanted. It does not depend on n. So the bound is uniform in n. It goes to 0 as beta goes to infinity. Okay, so we are done. We've proved exactly what we wanted to prove. So this concludes the fact that beta c in dimension 2 is finite. Okay. Okay, so now I'm going to explain how you can go from this result in dimension 2 to a result in arbitrary dimensions. So extension to d larger or equal to 3. So one way to do this extension is to repeat the same argument as we have made. So the same proof works. The only thing that is a bit harder is when you get the sum over all. So contours now are surfaces. If you're in dimension 3, contours will be surfaces. You won't get lines because that was a two-dimensional phenomenon. So you will get surfaces. So you'll have to sum over all surfaces that surround the origin. And the sum over all such surfaces is much more complicated to bound than the sum over lines. Right? So that's the only place where you have to work harder if you want to adapt this Peirce argument. So this I will not explain here. It's explained in the book if you want. But what I will do instead is I will use correlation inequalities to show that, so goal, I want to show that beta c of d is always smaller or equal than beta c of d minus 1. Okay. If I can show that, then I'm done, because for any dimension d greater or equal to 3, I get that beta c of d will be smaller than beta c of 2, which is already proved to be finite. Okay, so would be done if you manage to prove this inequality. So I just want to explain how this works. It's very easy. I will be a bit sketchy, but it should be enough to convince you that it works easily. So we'll only explain how you go from dimension 2 to dimension 3, just for notational convenience. There is absolutely no difference, and the same argument works to go from any dimension d minus 1 to any dimension d. But I will go from 2 to 3. Okay. So the idea is the following. So on the blackboard, I will even go one step further. The picture will be how you go from dimension 1 to 2, but you should keep 2 and 3 in mind instead. So the idea is that the Ising model, so that's just the idea. The Ising model on Z3 can be seen as a stack of Ising model on Z2. With some additional interactions. So we'll make a picture. So that's the idea. So this is supposed to represent the Ising model on Z3. So at some point you have the plus boundary condition. Also here you have the plus boundary condition. And then you have the next line. I will not draw many of them because it takes too much time, but last one. Etc. Okay. So that's supposed to be a piece of the Ising model on Z3, which I draw on the blackboard, so it's a piece of Z2. And now each of these layers here, I can see as an Ising model on Z2 with plus boundary condition. So here, of course, on the blackboard, it's an Ising model on Z. Okay. So that's this. I can see an Ising model on Z2. So I can see these three as many Z2s stacked one on top each other, and with some additional interaction. So the only thing that makes the model on the Ising model on Z3 different from a collection of Ising model on Z2 is the fact that my Ising model on Z2, they interact with each other through these interactions here. Okay, and there. We have all these interactions. But if I was to remove all these interactions, then this would make, I start with the Ising model on Z3, I remove all these interactions between the planes, then I just get a stack of independent Ising models on Z2, okay? And the magnetization of these models on Z2, it will be smaller because by the GKS inequality, if I remove an interaction, I just get a smaller expectation, okay? So the idea is really that using the GKS inequality, I should be able to go from Z3 to Z2 by removing edges. Okay? So that's essentially what we are going to do, except that we don't have to decouple all these layers. It's enough to just to decouple the layer containing 0, but the idea is really this one. Okay, so let me try to explain this a bit better. So let me denote by Bn3, it will be the box in Z3. Just for this argument, I will put an additional superscript to distinguish the two-dimensional case and the three-dimensional case. So this is just minus n cube as a subset of these three. And then I also have the box B n, which I will denote by 2, which will be minus n square, that I want also to see as a subset of these three. So I will just take it cross 0, and then this is a subset of these three. So it's the plane at height 0 in these three. Okay, I mean a piece of the plane at height 0 of these three. Okay. Now, let me introduce the edges, the coupling constant, that are along the edges that couple this copy of B2 to the, so I have, here is my B2, 0 is here, and then I have the rest of the system here. So the whole stuff is B3 of n, this whole thing, okay? And that's supposed to represent B2 of n. Okay. Again, I've lost one dimension because I'm on the blackboard, but I hope it's clear. And now I want just to give a name to the set of edges that couple the spins in B2 of n with the other spins in B3 of n. Okay. All these spins with the other spins there. So all these red edges, so I don't know, I can call them, say, I don't know, F will be the set of all pairs ij in these three, or in, well, doesn't matter, in these three, who cares, such that I is equal to some I1, I2, and 0, so it has 0 third component, so it's lying in this plane, and J is equal to the same I1 and I2, and then it has plus or minus 1 as third component. Okay, so it's really either an edge connecting of this type or an edge of this type. Okay. And then I use the GKS inequality to conclude the following. If I look at sigma 0 plus in B3n, then we know from what we saw of the GKS inequality that if I decrease the coupling constant Gij, if I make them smaller, so for the moment all the Gijs are equal to beta for ij which are neighbors. Okay. But now if I decrease some from beta to 0, removing all these edges means that I'm replacing the coupling constant beta by a coupling constant equal to 0. So if I decrease the value of Jij, then I decrease the expected value here. Okay. So this will be bigger than the same expected value in the same box, but where I've set Gij equal to 0 for all ij in this set F. So I'm setting to 0 some of the coupling constant that decreases by GKS the expected value of sigma 0, and I get that. But now that means that I've removed all these edges, and I've removed all these edges. So now the box B2n, it's not coupled to anything else. It's just a two-dimensional Ising model. So this is just the expected value of sigma 0 plus, say, in Bn, in B2n, but as a two-dimensional model, as a subset of Z2. Okay. So it's just the expected value in the box of radius n of the two-dimensional Ising model with plus boundary condition. Right? So this is always bigger than that. And now the conclusion immediately follows. By definition of beta c, the definition of beta c that we saw, I don't know, last week or the week before, I think last week. So if you remember, beta c of D was defined as, for example, the infimum over all beta, such that sigma 0 plus in infinite volume, so beta 0 is larger than 0. Okay. That's one way of defining beta c that we saw. Now let me put explicitly the dimension. So this would be in 3 dimensions. Okay, that would be beta C of 3. Okay. But now, this, if I replace this expected value by the expected value in dimension 2, which is this one, I get a smaller one. So it's smaller, so it's harder in dimension 2 to be bigger than 0. So this means that this will be smaller than the infimum of a roll beta, such that sigma 0 plus in 2D now, beta 0 is larger than 0, just because this is larger than that. Okay. But that's just beta C of 2. Okay. So this inequality for the spin at the origin in the box of radius n immediately gives you an inequality for the critical values of the models. Okay. So this concludes the proof that you have beta C of D finite for all D larger or equal to 2. Okay.
Excuse me?
Yes?
So like in the first box we have the pluses outside of the big box.
Yes.
And then like in the first step we don't see pluses. When
you don't have pluses on the top and bottom, but you have pluses on the boundary there.
Okay.
And that's all you want. In dimension 2, they are only acting there, right? Good. Okay, so this concludes the analysis when h is equal to 0 and beta is very large. So now we know that in this case, you do have two infinite volume Gibbs states. You have that mu plus, the plus state is different from the minus state. You have that this expectation is strictly positive. Okay, good. So now what we are going to look at is what happens when h is still equal to 0, but beta is very small. Okay, we want to understand what happens when beta is very small, and to show that in this case, the plus state and the minus state coincide. And so we want to show that beta C of D is strictly positive for any D. So that's section 373. Uniqueness of the Gibbs state, uniqueness at high temperature. So again, work with h equal to 0, and the goal is to show that beta C of D is strictly positive, and this time for any dimension. One and more. The strategy will be rather similar to what we just did. So if you remember, the first step in the analysis for large beta was to introduce this low temperature representation, a geometrical representation of the configurations that was convenient to analyze events of the type I have a minus pin at some vertex. So we are going to do something similar. So we are going to introduce another graphical representation of the model. It will not be a graphical representation of configurations of the model, not the same kind of things we did for large beta, but it will be a graphical representation that encodes in a nice way correlations in the model. So this is what I want to explain now. So it's called the high temperature representations, because it works nicely at high temperature. So it's okay. High temperature representation. As I said, there are many graphical representations for the Ising model. And you will see several other representations in the second semester. Okay. So the basic observation for the high temperature representation is very simple. It's again the fact that the spins take only value plus and minus 1. So in particular, the product sigma I, sigma j is always equal to plus or minus 1. So from this very simple observation, I can deduce immediately the following identity. If I write E beta sigma I, sigma j, which are the kind of weight that appear when you look at the Boltzmann weight, exponential of minus the Hamiltonian, gets things of this type. Okay. This I can rewrite as follows. So let me, okay, I write it and then I explain why it's obviously true. It's cosh beta plus sigma I, sigma j, sinh beta. Okay, hyperbolic cosine of beta plus sigma I, sigma j hyperbolic sine of beta, and that's a trivial identity for the following reason. This is just E beta plus E minus beta over 2. This is, let me write it like that. This will be plus or minus, depending on the sign of sigma I, sigma j, E beta minus E minus beta over 2. So if sigma I, sigma j is equal to plus 1, on the left-hand side you have E beta, and here you have E beta over 2 plus E beta over 2, which gives you E beta, and E minus beta over 2 minus E minus beta over 2, which cancel. So you just get E beta on both sides. And the same if sigma I, sigma j is equal to minus 1, then it's the E minus beta that survive and the E beta that disappear because of the minus sign here. Okay, so it's a very simple identity. And it will be convenient to factor out the cosh. So let me write it like that. So I get cosh beta times 1 plus sigma I, sigma j, hyperbolic tangent of beta. It's more convenient in this form. It's more convenient for the following reason. So what I'm really interested in is not E beta sigma I, sigma j, it's E minus h lambda, say, which is of the form product over all ij in E lambda b, E beta sigma I, sigma j, by definition of the Hamiltonian. I just get this. And now these guys, I can substitute them by this expression here, so I just get a cosh beta to the power of the number of edges in E lambda b times the product over all edges ij in E lambda b of 1 plus sigma I, sigma j, hyperbolic tangent of beta. Okay. And now it's convenient to have 1 plus because it's very simple to expand the product of the form 1 plus something. So let me do it here. So I'm going to use this very simple identity. So if you have the product, so if I have E finite set, say not empty, to get something non-trivial, then the product over all element E of 1 plus some function alpha of E. This you can very easily check, for example, by induction or whatever you prefer, that this is just given by the sum over all subsets, say F in E, product over all E in F, alpha. Okay, so I'm going to use this very simple combinatorial identity. And it's really simple because when you expand this product, for each E in capital E, either you take the 1 or you take the alpha of E. Right? So I can encode one summand of the, once I've expanded this, I get many terms, the sum of many terms, and each of these terms can be indexed by the set of E's for which I've taken alpha of E. So I call this set F, which is the set F I'm summing over here. And then for each E in F, I take an alpha of it, so it's still there. For the other one, it's taken 1, so it's a product of 1s. So it's really obvious, this identity. So I'm going to use this identity to expand this product here. So this gives me E minus h lambda is equal to this cosh term, which is a bit annoying, but it will disappear also later. And then we expand this product and we get a sum over, yeah, okay, the notation was not very good because here I want to call this E, so but in E lambda B. And then I have a product over all the edges in E of this factor. So first it gives me a hyperbolic tangent beta to the power of the number of edges. So I get hyperbolic tangent of beta to the power of E. And then I still get a product over all edges ij in E, sigma I, sigma j. Okay? Nothing much. Now this product here, it would be nice to have it written, to write it down slightly differently. So this I would like to have, instead of having the product over edges, I would like to have product over vertices. Let me do it this way. So I would like to have this to be the product over all I in lambda of sigma I. So you see, when you take product of terms of the type sigma I, sigma j, I will have a given sigma I that will appear a certain number of times. How many times will it appear? Well, exactly the number of times you have an edge incident at I. So each time you have an edge that has I as an endpoint, you will get a sigma I in this product, an edge of E, of course. Right? So it will be to the power of something that I will call IIE, which is just the incidence of the set E at I, so IIE. Is just given by the number of j in ZD such that the edge ij belongs to E. Okay? So it's the number of edges in E that touch the vertex I. Okay? So that's what you get. So that's for E minus h, but once I have an expression for E minus h, and then we'll make the break, I immediately get an expression for the partition function. So let me just start that, and then we take 15 minutes break. So this implies that the partition function in lambda plus boundary condition, this I can write, well, by definition, the sum over all omega in omega lambda plus E minus h lambda of omega. But this now, using this expression for E minus h, this becomes this cosh beta to the power E lambda b. Then I get so I have two sums. I have the sum over omega and the sum over E. They are both finite sums. I can interchange them if I want. It will be convenient to put first the sum over E, E subset of E lambda b, hyperbolic tangent to the number of edges in E times, and now comes the part that depends on the configuration. So here I insert the sum over omega in omega lambda plus, product over all, okay, I wrote it here as product over all I in lambda, sigma I to the power I E. So you get this expression, and now I claim that this we can explicitly compute this sum over omega very easily. We'll do it just after the break, otherwise it will delay too much the break. So let's stop and we start again in 15 minutes. Okay, we'll start. So we are at this stage. So I said that now it's very easy to evaluate this sum. So one way to do it, which is convenient, is to realize that since the summand that we have here is completely factorized over the vertices, I can also factorize the sum. So that's just equal to the product over all I in lambda, sum over omega I, which is equal to plus or minus 1, and sigma I, or I should put omega I here, I'm sorry, because it's we are evaluating it at omega, so the random variable takes value omega. So it's omega I, E. So we just get the product over I of very simple sums containing only 2 terms each. And now let's look at what this sum is equal to. So again, so this is equal to, well, there are 2 cases. If the exponent here is odd, so if the exponent is odd, since omega is plus 1 or minus 1, you would just get, when you sum plus 1 plus minus 1, which would give you 0. So it's 0 if I, E is odd. And if the exponent is even, then you get 1 plus minus 1 to an even power, so it's 1 again. So 1 plus 1 is 2. If E is even. Now we take the product of all i's of such quantities. So as soon as one of the factors is equal to 0, you get everything equal to 0. So the only possibility to get something non-zero is that IE is even for all vertices I. Right? So I will introduce a particular subset of such a set of edges E, such that this is true, because this is the only subset which will give a positive contribution. So let me denote it like that. E lambda plus even. This is the set of all E subset of E lambda B, such that E is even for all I in lambda. Okay, so that's the only set. The only E's that will give you a contribution are those in this set. Otherwise, you get a factor equal to 0 somewhere. Okay? And then, when you are in this set, if you take an E which is in this set, then that means that you get a 2 for each I in lambda. So this gives you a 2 to the power lambda. So from this, you see that the partition function Z lambda plus is actually equal to, there is this cosh beta E lambda B. Then you get a 2 to the power lambda, another constant, and then you get the sum over all E, which belong to this set. Of what? Well, of hyperbolic tangent beta to the power E. Okay, which is here. Everything else has been evaluated already. So that's the high temperature representation for the partition function. Let's do this. It's very similar to what we got for the low temperature representation, except that instead of contours, you get these subsets of edges which are even. Okay, good. Then now the main observation, we are not so much interested in the behavior of the partition function. We are more interested in the behavior of sigma 0. We would like to get a representation for this quantity. So since we already know how the denominator, so this is a ratio of two things, and the denominator is just the partition function, so we already know how it behaves. So let's multiply by Z lambda plus to look at the numerator. And if you look at the numerator, it's just the sum over all omega and omega lambda plus omega 0 E minus h lambda of omega. So that means that I can repeat all the argument we just made here, say here, with an additional omega 0. So let's just see what this would change. I don't want to write down everything again, so let me just point out what changes. So you would get an omega 0 here, right? So which means that you have an additional omega 0 here, so you are adding to the power which is here, you're adding 1 if I is equal to 0. Okay? Because you have an additional power for an additional factor of omega 0. So when I is equal to 0, you get plus 1. Okay? So that means you get plus delta I 0. Which means that here you have, the condition becomes a bit more complicated to write down, but it's the same. So it will be 0 if IE is odd. For all I different from 0, that's for I different from 0. But when I is equal to 0, IE, since you have plus 1 when I is equal to 0, you need that IIE plus 1 is odd, that means that IIE is even. So I0E is even. So that's the first condition, one there. And then you get a 2 if you have this for I different from 0, and I0E is odd. Okay, I don't have any space to write it down, but I hope it's clear what you get. Okay, so the condition is just reversed when you have the vertex 0, but otherwise it's exactly the same. So now what plays the role of this set E lambda plus even is a set that I will introduce it here. So it's a set that I will write E lambda plus 0, which is the set of all subsets E of E lambda B, such that, say, I 0E is odd, and IE is even for all I in lambda minus 0. Okay? Just flip the condition at 0 with respect to the other ones, and then you get exactly the same expression as above. So this will be given by cosh beta E lambda B 2 to the power lambda, and then the sum over all E in this E lambda plus 0, a hyperbolic tangent beta to the power. Completely similar, only the set of configuration is slightly different. The set of configuration of edges slightly different. So in the end, I get the following representation for sigma 0. Sigma 0 plus lambda is equal, well, the ratio between this expression and the expression we got for the partial function z. So you see that the constants which are here, they are the same, so they cancel. And the only thing that remains is a sum over E in E lambda plus 0 hyperbolic tangent beta to the power E divided by the same quantity, but where the set of configuration of edges is E plus even. Hyperbolic tangent beta to the power E. Okay, so this is the high temperature representation for sigma 0. And you can do that for general correlation sigma A. It will be enough for us, this one. Okay. Now, in order to prove that beta C is positive, it will be convenient to rewrite this slightly differently. So let me explain what I want to do. So here is the set lambda. I will basically work now with the box Bn. I will set lambda equal Bn from now on. This is completely general, but it will be more convenient to derive what we want, to work with the box. Then we have 0 somewhere. And then I'm looking at what contributes to the numerator here. So in the numerator, I have a set of edges which have an even degree at every vertex except the origin. So everywhere here, it's really a union of loops of this type, because it has to be even everywhere. Something like that. Okay. And then you have one component that has to contain 0, because the degree at 0 is odd, so you must have at least one edge arriving at 0. So at least you have one edge. Maybe you have more, maybe you have 3. Okay. Could happen. But then it has to be even everywhere else. So this is not possible. This would be odd. So I have to go on. So I will explain this in a more rigorous way in a minute. But you will get something like that, plus some additional decoration of this type. Okay. You get something of this type. Now, so why the component containing 0 is going up to the exterior of the box, I will explain, but it's exactly what occurs. So this component here that contains 0, the connected component of E that contains 0, I want to give it a name. I will call it E0. So this guy is E0, all right? And the rest is E prime. So I'm splitting E into two pieces. So I'm writing E. So for any E in this E lambda plus 0, I'm writing E is equal to E0. So this is the connected component that contains the origin. It's not empty by construction. Union E prime, which is the rest. Okay. Now, what can we say about E0 and E prime? Well, first, okay, E0, it contains 0. Okay, sure. It's connected, well, by definition. And it's also an element of E lambda plus 0. Because this component, it is odd. It has an odd incidence at the origin, and it's even everywhere else, so it's in this set. On the other hand, E prime is an element of E lambda plus even. At every vertex that it visits, it has an even degree. It never visits 0, because it's E0 that touches 0. This set never touches 0, so it's even everywhere. So it's in E lambda plus even. Okay. And moreover, it's in a it's contained in this, okay, this set here. This is the set of all edges not sharing an endpoint with an edge of E0. I'm just saying here that E prime is disjoint. I mean, you want E0 to be a connected component, so it cannot touch another component in E prime, otherwise the union would be in the connected component E0. So an endpoint with an edge of E0. Okay, as in this picture. So it's forbidden to use any of these edges which are incident on E0, because this would make me part of E0. Okay, so I have a condition of this type. Good. Well, now we're done for the representation, because we get the following expression. You get that sigma 0 plus, say, lambda, but in a minute it will be Bn and just Bn. This will be given as a sum over all E0 in E lambda plus 0 connected, contained in the origin. Hyperbolic tangent beta is 0. Well, I have not mentioned it, but it's obvious. Hyperbolic tangent beta to the power of the number of edges in E factorizes as hyperbolic tangent of beta to the power of the number of edges in E0 times hyperbolic tangent beta to the power of the number of edges in E prime. So this factorizes. Here I put the part which depends on E0. And then I get the following. I need a bit of room, so it will be a ratio. In the numerator, I will get the sum over all E in E lambda plus, or E prime if you want, even, such that E prime is included in delta of E0, as I've explained here. It has to be disjoint from E0. Hyperbolic tangent beta E prime, and then the denominator you have exactly the same thing but without this constraint. E, it's an element of E lambda plus even hyperbolic tangent of beta to the power. Okay, that's what you get. So I'm done. That's the final expression I want to use. This one. With this, it's now relatively easy to prove that beta c is strictly positive. So proof that beta c of D is strictly positive for any D. greater or equal to 1. So I'm starting from this expression. Now I'm taking lambda equal bn. As I said, it will be much more convenient. So looking at this expression, and the first observation is, I said it orally, but I've not written it down. So the numerator here and the denominator are identical, except for the fact that in this sum over E prime, I have an additional constraint that E prime is included in delta of E0. But if you remove this constraint, you have the same thing in the numerator and denominator. So this ratio is smaller than 1, always. Okay, so this is smaller than 1. Always. Okay, so you get from what we did before that sigma 0 plus bn is smaller or equal the sum over all E naught in E lambda plus 0 connected, containing the origin, hyperbolic tangent, beta E naught. Okay, you get this very nice. Lambda is bn, sorry, here. Okay. Now, if you remember the picture I drew before here, I was claiming, and that's very important for what we want to do, that the connected component containing 0 has to extend to the boundary of the external boundary of the box Bn. So it has to contain at least one vertex of the external boundary. It could contain more. It could have, for example, something like that. But it must contain at least one vertex of the external boundary. And I want to explain why. It's trivial why. So claim E0 intersection the external boundary of Bn is not empty. Well, the easiest way of seeing that is the following. So sum over all I in ZD, I E naught. So remember, I E naught is the number of edges of E naught that touch the vertex I. Right? So when I will be summing over all possible i's, I will get for each, so say maybe I have these two edges belong to E naught. There are others, but let's just look at these two. So when I'm summing over all i's, I will get a contribution coming from this guy. I will get two contributions coming from, so I get one here, two contributions coming from this guy, one contribution coming from this guy. Okay? Which means that, and that's obvious, I will get one contribution for each endpoint of every edge that I will get in the box, in my set E naught. So each edge will contribute one. It will be incident at two vertices, so it will contribute one for this vertex and one for this vertex. So this will just be equal to 2 times the number of vertices in E naught. Okay? Because each edge in E naught has 2 endpoints, and each endpoint contributes 1 to this sum. Okay, so it's 2 E naught. And what is important for us is not that it's 2 E naught. What is important is that 2 E naught is an even number. That's an even number. But we know that I0 E naught is odd. Right? So in this sum, I have at least one term which is odd. But the sum of all the terms is even. That means that I must at least have another odd term somewhere. So there must exist I different from 0 such that I E0 is odd. There may be several, but at least I need one. Okay, good, but we already know because the set E0 is in this E plus 0, we know that I E0 is even for all I in lambda, or Bn in our case, Bn set minus 0. Okay, all vertices which are not 0, they have an even number of edges of E0 arriving at them. Okay? So that means that these odd ones that I have to find, they cannot be inside the box Bn, so they have to be outside the box Bn. That's all. Okay, so it proves this claim. So indeed, you have a picture of this type. So E0 is really going from 0 to the boundary of the box. So that's very good because it tells you the following. tells you something about the size of the set E0. It must be very large because it must go from the center of the box to the boundary of the box, so it contains at least n plus 1 edges. So I can now proceed as we did for the Peierls argument, summing over all this set E0 according to their lengths. So this implies that sigma 0 plus Bn, this is smaller than the sum over all lengths, which have to be larger than n because as I said, E0 has to go from the middle of the box to the boundary of the box, so it has to have a length larger than n. And then I get hyperbolic tangent beta to the power L. And then I get an additional combinatorial factor, which is the number of set E0 in E lambda plus 0, which are connected, contain 0, and of length, of total size L. Okay. It's very similar to what we did before, except that now we have a minimal length which is growing with n, which will be very important. So computing this, bounding from above this set, it's harder than what we did before. And that's the content of, it's not very hard, but it's harder. It's the content of lemma 338. Which tells you the following. Take a general finite connected graph. So let G be a connected. All my graphs will be simple graphs, so no loops, no double edges, and things like that. So let G be a connected graph with capital N edges. Okay. Then starting from an arbitrary vertex of G, there is a path which crosses all edges of G exactly twice. A path crossing each edge of G exactly twice. That's what will be important for us. It's a semi-trivial statement. So I will sketch the proof. It is really very simple by induction. Induction on n, the number of edges in the graph. So, proof of this lemma by induction on n. So when n is equal to 1, it's not very difficult. So when your graph is this, you take a vertex v as a starting point, and then your path is just this path, and done. Okay? So now let's assume it's okay for 1 up to n minus 1, and for all graphs with edges with 1 up to n minus 1 edges. And now let's look at what happens when you have one additional edge. So take G with n edges, and then what you do is the following. And V is some vertex in G. Okay, I will denote it like that, but okay, it's really an element of the vertex set of G. Okay, I think it's clear. V a vertex in G. Then what you do is you remove one edge from G in such a way that the set of edges remains connected. So in such a way that the remaining edges form a connected set. So that means you are removing an edge which at least at one of its endpoints it has degree 1. So it's really at the end of the branch of, or it's in a loop. So either you remove an edge like that, it doesn't change anything about connected properties, or you remove an edge like this one, which does not change anything about. Okay. And you have always either, I mean, an edge of either type always exists. So form a connected component or connected set. Okay, connected set, and I want V, this vertex that I've chosen, to be in the part of the graph that in this connected component, and V belongs to this. This also can always be done. I'll let you check that V belongs to this connected component. It's very simple. Okay, and then you're done, because the graph you get when you remove one edge now possesses n-1 edges. So by the induction assumption, there is a path starting at V and going through all this new graph. So let's call G prime this new graph, be the resulting graph with n-1 edges. Then there is a path pi starting at V and going through each edge of G prime exactly twice. Okay. So I've removed an edge. Let me give a name to the edge I've removed. I will call it E, and it's the edge ij. Just to be explicit. So what I'm going to do is the following. So first follow the path pi, the path P here, follow P until first visit at I or j. First time you hit one of these two vertices. Okay. Then cross the edge ij twice. Then cross the edge ij twice. I mean, really, just do that. Right? You arrive here with your path P, and then you cross ij twice, and then you go on with your path P until the end. Okay, and then I will continue on this side. Then you just go on with the path P, and this gives you a path that crosses every edge of G exactly twice. Okay, then the last step, then follow until its end. Okay, this gives you the path that you want. Okay, so it's trivial, but why is it useful to us? It's useful because if I want to bound, so this set of edges, it contains always the origin. This graph, it contains always the origin. It's connected. So I can apply the lemma to these guys, and the lemma tells me that I can find a path of length 2L, because the set is of length L. I can find a path of length 2L that crosses exactly twice each edge of E0. So I can encode the set E0, which is here, by a path of a particular, for each E0 there, I can encode it by a particular path of length 2L. Okay, it will have exactly the same set of edges. Okay? So by the lemma, implies that for any E naught in E lambda plus 0 connected containing 0 and of size L can be encoded as a path starting from 0 and of length 2L. Okay. I start from this graph, I extract a path using the lemma, I get a path of length 2L starting from 0, and the set of edges visited by this path is exactly the set of edges of E0, so it completely characterizes E0. Okay? It's the same thing. But now I can forget about how I've obtained this path. The number of E0 that I get here will be smaller than the number of passes of length 2L starting at 0. So that means that the number of sets E0 in E lambda plus 0 connected containing 0 and of size L, this is smaller than the number of passes starting at 0 and of length 2L. Okay. But this is trivial to bound. So for each edge I'm adding to the path, I have at most 2D choices. I could do better, but this will be enough for what we want to do. So I have 2D choices for each edge. I have 2L edges, so the number of passes is bounded by 2D to the power 12, which means it's 4D squared to the power L. Okay. Well, now I'm done because I can inject this in the inequality here and conclude. So let's do that. This implies that sigma 0 plus Bn, this is smaller than the sum of all L larger than n. We get this hyperbolic tangent of beta. Hyperbolic tangent of beta. This will be to the power L. But then I get for the cardinality of this set there, we said that it's smaller than 4D squared to the power L. So I get an additional 4D squared here. Now, hyperbolic tangent of beta is always smaller than beta, so this I can write like that. It would be simpler to see what happens. 4D squared beta to the power L. And this is smaller than E minus some constant that depends on D and beta times n. N is the minimal length of my path, actually n plus 1 is the minimal length. We see D beta strictly positive for all beta which are smaller than 1 over 4D squared. Okay. So as soon as beta is smaller than 1 over 4D squared, this expected value of the spin at the origin with plus boundary condition is smaller than something exponentially small in n. So in particular, for all beta smaller than 1 over 4D squared, I get that the limit as n goes to infinity of sigma 0 plus Bn, this is 0. Okay. But that's just sigma 0 plus beta 0, right? That's just the expected value of the spin in the plus state. Okay, so we have shown that this is equal to 0 for all beta smaller than this, so this means that beta critical of D is always larger or equal 1 over 4D squared. And we are done. In particular, it's strictly positive. Okay, we have proven that beta C of D is strictly positive in any dimension. Now I want to do it because it's nice, even though you have already done it in exercises in a different way. From what we have done today, we can also immediately prove a much stronger statement when dimension is equal to 1, that is that beta C of 1 is equal to plus infinity. It's not only positive, it's actually plus infinity. So prove that beta C of 1 is equal to plus infinity. Okay, you did it using the transfer matrix. Here we are going to do it with the high temperature representation. The reason is that in dimension 1, the set of graphs in these two sets, E lambda plus even, E lambda plus 0, is very small. I mean, you have very few graphs that contribute. So let's take Bn, the set minus n, n. So we're in dimension 1 now. So we have plus boundary conditions. We have something like that. So somewhere you have 0. And then you have again plus boundary conditions. So that's the graph you are interested in. And now let's look at what are the subgraphs of this graph, of this set of edges, that belongs to E lambda plus even. Okay, this will be, and let me do it. Well, already this one belongs. So the graph which is empty, where I have no edge at all, so all these edges are removed. It has an even degree everywhere because it has 0 degree everywhere. So that's fine, so it's one of them. But then what is the other possibility? Well, the other possibility is that you have at least one vertex somewhere which has a non-zero degree. Can be anywhere in the graph, say this one. This guy has a non-zero degree, which means that I have an incident edge, so this guy has to be there. But if it has to be there, this has to be even. So this guy has also to be there so that the number of edges incoming here is even. But that means that this guy has to be here, but this guy has to be here, and this guy, and this guy. So that's the only possibility you get. So the only graph contributing to E lambda plus, okay, E Bn plus even are these two graphs, the empty graph and the full graph. Okay, it's very easy, you have only two. And in the same way, if you look at what graphs are contributing to E lambda plus 0, again, you have very few graphs. So that's 0. Okay. There will be 2 again. And the first one is falling, so it has to have a knot degree at 0. So the only way to have a knot degree at 0 is to have one edge incoming at 0. So let's say it's this one. But here it has to have an even degree, so I have to add this edge. But here it has to have an even degree, so I have to add this edge. And the other possibility is that at 0 it's the left edge that is incoming, which means that here I have to add 1, here I have to add 1. So the only two graphs that contribute are the two half lines, I mean the two pieces of half lines. Okay. And then with that, we can use the identity we have for sigma 0 plus Bn to explicitly compute it. So we are not only getting a bound, we are actually just explicitly computing this expected value by looking at these graphs. So let me remind you, so sigma 0 plus Bn, we have proved that this is the sum over all E in E lambda plus 0 hyperbolic tangent beta to the power of the number of edges in E divided by the same thing, but with E now in E lambda plus even hyperbolic tangent. So that was an identity, power E. Okay. And now I'm applying it with the graphs we have. So for the numerator, we have seen that we have these two graphs contributing. These two graphs contain the same number of edges, which is equal to 2n plus 1. So you just get 2 times hyperbolic tangent of beta to the power n plus 1. And in the denominator, you have two graphs, one which contains 0 edges, so just get 1, and one which contains 2n plus 2 edges, which means that you get hyperbolic tangent of beta to the power 2n plus 2. Okay. Now, for any beta finite, hyperbolic tangent of beta is smaller than 1. So the denominator is always larger than 1, it's not a problem. And the numerator is smaller than 1, to the power n plus 1, it's going to 0, as n goes to infinity, for any beta finite. Okay. This implies immediately that beta c of 1 is equal to plus infinity. Okay. So it's a very nice way of computing. When h is equal to 0, it's much simpler to compute most quantities using the high temperature representation rather than the transfer matrix. When h is non-zero, this becomes a mess, and it's easier to use the transfer matrix. Okay. So let me maybe briefly summarize where we are now and what we are going to do next week. in the remaining 2 or 3 minutes. So what we have proved until now, well, we've completely sorted out what happens when h is equal to 0. So we know that, say, let me take dimension 2 and higher so that it's interesting. So we have shown that there exists a beta c, which depends on the dimension, which is strictly positive and finite, such that we have the following pictures. So when beta is smaller than beta c, beta larger than beta c. So here we have shown that if you look at the magnetization as a function of the magnetic field, the limit of the magnetization as you go to 0 is 0. So it's something like that. We have not yet excluded the fact that maybe you have other discontinuities elsewhere. It could happen. At this stage, we don't know. Okay, so this could happen, we don't know, but we certainly know that you're going through 0. Okay? Because we have shown that this is 0 for small beta, but this is equal to m star of beta, which is the value at 0. Okay? So this is equal to the value here. And we've seen also this, so again, could have additional discontinuities elsewhere. This we don't know. Okay. Something like that again. We don't know if this is here or not yet. Okay. But we know that this m star of beta is strictly positive. So this ferromagnetic versus paramagnetic behavior, we have already derived it. So the behavior when h goes to 0, when you remove the magnetic field, the fact that a magnetization remains or not, we have proved. What remains to understand is it clear that there are no other phase transitions elsewhere on the graph, so for other values of h. So next week, we are going to prove that there is uniqueness for all beta and h different from 0. Okay? And the way we are going to do that is that we are actually going to prove something very strong. In fact, we are going to show that h goes to psi of beta h, so the pressure, and obviously it will be also true for the magnetization, are real analytic functions on r minus 0. Okay. So this piece, you cannot have discontinuities. The branch that you get here and there, the branch that you get here and there are analytic functions. So they are super smooth as you can be. Okay. So that's what we are going to do next week. And the proof will be completely different from what we did essentially today. So today it was rather combinatorial proof. And I mean, mixture of probabilistic and combinatorial proof. And next week it will be mostly complex analysis, with a little bit of combinatorics to make some estimates. But, okay, so you want to prove real analyticity, so without complex analysis it's a bit difficult. Okay, are there questions about what we have done today? No? Good.